Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. Social connectedness is an incredibly important thing when it comes to maintaining human health, and this ranges everywhere from romantic partnerships to very close friends to acquaintances to business connections to simply people that you recognize because you go to the same cafe every day and it's a simple smile and nod as you walk by them. These are very important parts of feeling healthy, and it's something that I've realized that is very important, and I think especially for men as they get older, there are so many studies that men's social networks seem to decline. And there's a couple of reasons for this. I think men are more comfortable with going against the tribe, going against the herd and doing things by themselves. And when you look at the contrary, with women, it's very important for them to typically feel connected. And as a result, they're always planning events, organizing things and inviting each other out. Whereas men, especially once they get into relationships, and I've seen this with my male friends, is that they outsource a lot of the work of inviting people, even their own friends, to their partners. And what happens is that later on, much later on, when you get to your later points in life and you might lose your partner, for example, all of a sudden you've become very dependent on somebody else for maintaining your social networks, and that has gone. And so as a 30-year-old, I want to avoid a lot of those negative pitfalls, and I've realized how important it is to have strong social networks and connections across all these categories. Now, in my last episode, I obviously talked about beginning my search for a lifetime romantic partner, but this episode, what I'm focusing on is friendships, acquaintances, business connections, and all these important people who you want to have around you, and why it's important to be a connector in your social network. So in my mid-20s, I fell into a very bad thought of mind in that I stopped organizing and planning events. And a big part of the reason was I felt like a bit taken for granted in the way that some of these events were planned. So I remember that we'd go on a event, for example, a camping trip, and everyone would be like, oh yeah, let's go camping. It's going to be such a great time. And as part of that, I'd go and I'd pick out the venue, I'd drive everyone, and everyone would pay. We'd split the costs evenly, but I did a bulk of the organizing. Everything from getting people there to buying the food to picking where we were going to go camping, for example. And I got to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to organize one of these until somebody else the next time somebody else suggests, let's go do a camping trip, I want them to do more planning. So I stopped organizing these things. And I realized that's a very unhealthy state of mind because, as I said, men, especially men, are generally very bad at these things. And if by getting into that kind of tit for tat mentality, like, oh wow, they're not going to plan something, so I'm not going to plan something either, everyone loses. And my big realization now, especially since I've come back from being overseas and I haven't been able to see many people since I've been away from Australia, is that I do want to see people again. And so I'm happy to incur those costs. Now, I've slightly changed the way I do things, and this is what I'm going to talk about in this episode, but it's very important to be the person and reach out to people, because at the end of the day, I would rather see people. It doesn't matter if other people aren't pitching in their weight when it comes to organizing, because there are many times where somebody invites me to an event and they've gone to all the work of doing the planning and the expenses and things like this. So, I've decided to do this again because it's just not worth waiting for the world to be fair. And there are immense benefits to being one of the people, or because there's going to be many people in a network who do this, but there's immense benefits to being the people in your network who actually bring other people together. So you want to be the connector. And I think there's more value in taking on that role, even though there might be a higher organizational cost to going through and doing these things. And we have all these amazing tools in the 21st century, such as Google Calendar, which make doing these things very, very interesting. And so people say, okay, great, I want to organize an event. What do I do if I don't have a space? Well, use a third space. And by a third space, I mean, you could go to a park. You could go to a cafe. It does not need to be expensive, because for a lot of you listening to this, you might not have your own space yet, right? You might be living with your family. You might have a roommate. You might just not have the level of privacy or the space that you actually own where you can bring people over. And that is absolutely fine, because a lot of my catch-ups I do now are, hey, let's go out for coffee, which where I live is relatively inexpensive. And I like to go out for runs. So I will do runs and I will say, hey, I'm running these times this week. Would you like to join me? Now, of course, that implies that people want to run. But if they do, I'm always more than happy to run with them. And so you can definitely utilize third spaces to go and meet people. And it's such a great way to do it. Things do not need to be as expensive as people think. There are many ways to organize events which do not need to be fancy and can be very inexpensive. And so that's an important one. And then I think the big one is, what happens if people say no or just simply don't respond? And this is always going to happen, because you need to think about, like in my own circumstances, there have been times where either I've explicitly said no to an event because I can't make it, which is fine. And there's other times where I've been such a, how would you say it, a clusterfuck, that I've been so disorganized that I haven't gotten back to somebody else. And I haven't done this anytime recently, but there was a definite time in my early 20s where I was just so overwhelmed and didn't know what I was doing that things would fall through the cracks. And how do you deal with this situation? So I think the important thing is developing a thick skin. And as somebody who's now trying to bring more people together, and there's many reasons I'm trying to bring people together. Partially, it's because I want to see people and I would like to have a coffee with them or go for a run with them. And this is just about maintaining the relationships I already have, as well as creating new relationships and meeting new acquaintances and deepening those relationships, as well as business connections. And so it's a great low-cost way to do that. But you've got to develop a thick skin when you start inviting people. And I always do things as, I've developed a thick skin, which is very, very fortunate. And so I'm happy to invite people, and if they say no, that's great. They've acknowledged it, but sometimes you won't even get that. It just won't be an acknowledgement at all. And there is a way to deal with this. And it was actually in the book Algorithms to Live By. So I spoke about this book in my last episode. There's an algorithm called the Exponential Backoff algorithm. And it's used in many communications protocols. So, for example, if my phone is trying to connect to a server, and let's say we don't get a connection, then it will try maybe after 2 seconds. So if we have a failed attempt at trying to connect to a server, we will wait 2 seconds. And the next time, if we also fail after trying again, we will now wait 4 seconds. And if we fail again, we will wait 8 seconds. And you can see exponentially, we increase the time delay between every time we reattempt to try and connect to a server. And this is called exponential backoff. If you look at the formula, it's time delay equals your base, so whatever time delay base you want. In our case, it's 2. And then you raise that to the power of the number of adverse events. So if we go back to the technology example, an adverse event is where we don't connect to the server. But if we look at social situations, an adverse event might be where somebody simply just doesn't acknowledge the fact that you've invited them to XYZ. And if somebody hasn't acknowledged your invite, the question is, how do you proceed with that? Now, in my old paradigm, if somebody didn't acknowledge something, I would have never gone and tried to hit them up again. So I would have never invited them again, because I would have had very thin skin, maybe felt a bit offended, been like, oh, why didn't they get back to me? But that's actually a very bad paradigm, because maybe they changed their phone number. There's so many reasons why somebody might have not got back to you. Maybe they were dealing with something in their personal life. And maybe it is the case that they are genuinely uninterested in meeting you or doing whatever you have planned. And so there's multiple factors, but you do not want to assume the worst case scenario. At the same time, you don't want to re-invite them at the same frequency. So if you've got another event coming back and they haven't responded to the last one, don't invite them to the next one. Rather, use the exponential backoff theory, because now you're adding some slack to the system. You don't want to overwhelm somebody, but if it was a genuine, they just didn't have the capacity to deal with it, you want to enable them to come back into the fold. So let's say I'm going for a run and I've invited a new acquaintance that I've met, but they haven't responded. They haven't come to the run. So if I do another group run, I'm not going to invite them to that one. But if we look at this exponential backoff, my invitation delay, I'm going to use the same one I gave in the example. So if they miss if there's an adverse event, so if they fail to respond to the first invitation, then I'm only going to invite them after 2 events have passed. And if they fail to respond to that one, then I'm only going to invite them after 4 events have passed. And as you can see, the number of invitations, the gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger, hypothetically till it gets to infinity. Now, you don't have to quite operate as an algorithm because you will get the point very quickly, but it's a good way to deal with things. And I found being more forgiving in your approach to how you deal with people is what you want to do. Like I said, when it comes to organizing events, yes, it can feel unfair to take on the organizational burden, but you are actually benefiting more by being the social connector and bringing people together. A, because I get to see them, but B, sometimes you can connect 2 people who didn't know each other and they can go do something great. And yes, you don't directly benefit from that, but I think knowing that you've joined people and helped them either form a friendship, form a business partner, or if you're doing matchmaking, form a romantic relationship, that is a wonderful thing. And there is definitely karmic energy that is going to be coming your way when you do things. Now, when you do reach out to people, I have a story about a friend of mine from high school, and we were great friends in high school. But there was some point in the last maybe 10 years where the number he saved for me was the wrong number. It was missing a digit. And I always think about this because we established a couple of years ago that he had my number saved wrong. And I remember seeing all these text messages where he attempted to contact me over the years. And it was a bit sad, a bit ironic. But the thing is, imagine how that relationship would be different if he had that extra digit in my phone number and was able to actually contact me. And so it's one of these things where when you are reaching out to people, it's probably also a good idea if you're not getting a ping back. So if you're not getting confirmation that they've received your invitation, maybe just check through your network. Of course, don't ask somebody else to contact them, but just double check that are the contact details I have for this person actually accurate. That's probably a worthwhile thing to do because I always think back to that relationship and he's a great friend. And when I see him, it's like we never, no time has passed, but at the same time, we don't catch up with at a very high frequency at all. And so it's one of these things where I'm like, would our relationship have been significantly different had I got all of those messages? So there's a lot of learnings that we can take from communications protocols, and I think just being a bit thick-skinned. But when I look, I had somebody make a comment that, oh wow, my social capital has been completely eroded. Well, yeah, because you actually have to get out there and bring people together. So that's my advice to anyone listening to this is if you feel like your social capital is being eroded, it's probably because you're on the side of the people who are coming to things and not actually creating the events and creating the experiences for other people to come to. And like I said, it does not need to be expensive. It does not need to be fancy. It can simply be, hey, let's go for a walk, let's grab a coffee. It can literally be that simple, and I think it's a very important thing to do. So now that, I've had this awakening and I've realized that it's really important for me, especially as a man, to go ahead and do this, it's what I've been doing. Now, there are practical and realistic considerations. Everyone has a very busy agenda, like I said. Some of my friends have kids now, and you won't be seeing them as often. I have 2 friends who live in a city near me, and every time I visit that city, we catch up, and it's literally, I see them for like 2 hours once a year, but it's a great 2 hours once a year. And it's, I really enjoy seeing them, and I always make the effort to reach out and say, hey, I'm going to be in your city for these dates. Can we go and hang out? And it is a very nice feeling. It's nice to see people. And even on my end, I don't have the capacity to see people with the same frequency that I did in high school because I now have things I'm doing that I'm trying to develop myself, that different directions that I'm taking my own life in. At the same time, it is important to take what you can get and to maintain some of those older relationships. And to be fair, a lot of the older relationships that I had, especially the class of people who fell into, I guess, what you'd more call the acquaintances in university. I mean, a lot of them I don't see very often, but you'll see them in passing every now and then, and that's fine. There is something called like Dunbar's number, which is the maximum number of social connections you can have. So I'm not telling you to go out there and be this menacing social butterfly. But if you do have a small network, let's say it's a handful of people, at the very least, nourish what you have. And that's very important. So I'm going to leave this episode there. And to all of you listening to this, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.